This is how we men try to comfort our wives. Watching her move through the airport made my chest tighten, even though I knew it was just her nerves. She walked like she was carrying an invisible weight, every step cautious, almost hesitant. Rolling suitcases clacked around us, people jostled past, and the announcements echoed overhead, but she barely noticed the chaos. Her hand kept brushing against her arm, as if touching herself could ground her. I wanted to reach out and steady her, but I wasn't sure if she'd take it. We finally made it to the gate, and I gestured toward a pair of seats. She didn't sit right away. Her eyes darted everywhere, her jaw tight. I could feel the tension radiating off her like static electricity in the air. I knew the second she sat, her fear would settle a little, but I also knew it wouldn't leave completely. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check my boarding pass, but I was really just watching her. I'd seen this look before, the clenched hands, the rapid blinking, the subtle rocking of her foot. It's how she handled stress, and I've learned to read it like a map. I wanted to make her laugh to distract her, but the words felt small against the weight of what she was feeling. Kids ran past, dragging stuffed animals behind them. A man in a business suit kept checking his watch like the seconds could save him. Somewhere, a woman laughed too loudly into her phone, and the sound made her flinch. I shifted closer, letting my shoulder brush hers, not enough to force contact, just enough to remind her I was there. When the boarding announcement rang out, her eyes flicked toward it, wide and apprehensive. I saw her exhale sharply, a small shiver running through her. She was already imagining the plane above us, already picturing herself trapped in the metal tube hurtling through the sky. I reached over and lightly touched her hand. "Hey," I said softly, "it's going to be okay." She didn't respond immediately, just looked down at her fingers wrapped tightly around the chair's armrest, but I could feel the tiniest shift, the faintest easing of tension, just enough for me to know she heard me. I didn't have to say anything else. Sometimes being present is the only comfort someone really needs. Walking down the narrow airplane aisle, I could feel her stiffen beside me. Every step she took was cautious, like the floor could give way beneath her. The cabin lights glowed softly, casting a warm golden hue over the cramped space, but I knew it did nothing to soothe her. I watched her scan the seats like she was assessing every danger before letting herself settle. When we reached our row, she hesitated before sliding into the window seat. I had to suppress a smile. Of course she picked the window. She liked knowing the world outside, but I also knew it was a double-edged sword. The view that usually comforted her often fueled her anxiety about what could go wrong. I took the aisle seat and tried to make myself as calm and solid as possible. Sliding my bag under the seat in front of me, I could see her fingers grip the armrest like she was holding onto the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. I wanted to reach over and say something reassuring, but I didn't want to startle her. I watched her eyes trace the wing outside the window, and I couldn't help but notice the tiny tremor in her hands. The metal stretching outward looked impossibly fragile, and I knew she was imagining the worst, even though I knew the wing was built to survive storms stronger than anything we'd ever face. The hum of the engines grew louder as we taxied, a vibration that traveled through the cabin and into our bones. I could feel her flinch at every bump and seam in the tarmac. I reached for her hand, letting mine rest lightly over hers, just enough to remind her she wasn't alone. Passengers were still boarding, moving around with that mix of urgency and indifference that airports always seem to produce. I noticed her glance at each person, each movement, a child tugging at a toy, a man adjusting his briefcase, and I knew she was taking mental notes, measuring safety and risk. I leaned back slightly, trying to exude calmness I didn't need to fake for myself. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "It's okay," I whispered, "I've got you." I could see the tiniest shift in her posture, a micro relief that told me she heard me, even if her mind was still spinning. That small acknowledgement, that fraction of trust, felt like a victory, for now it was enough. We were both ready, or at least as ready as we'd ever be to leave the ground. The moment the cabin door closed behind us, I felt the familiar mix of excitement and tension that always comes before takeoff. I glanced at her, sitting by the window, fingers tightly gripping the armrest. She looked small, fragile, and yet impossibly tense all at once. I knew the second we started moving, her anxiety would spike. But I had to stay calm, steady for both our sakes. The plane began to taxi, and I could feel the vibration through the seat, the slow rumble beneath our feet. I watched her react to every tiny movement, every subtle bump in the tarmac. She flinched, exhaled sharply, and her eyes darted to the wing outside, tracing its lines as though inspecting it for structural flaws. I wanted to tell her it was perfectly safe, but I knew facts wouldn't help right now. What she needed was presence, reassurance, someone to anchor her to reality. I reached over, letting my hand brush hers lightly. "Hey," I said softly, "it's okay, we're fine." My voice was calm, deliberate, hoping that my steadiness could transmit itself to her. The runway lights streaked past outside, glowing like a river of fire guiding us forward. Every second felt magnified, elongated, like the world had slowed down just for us. I watched her jaw tighten, her breathing shallow, and I felt a tug in my chest. How could something so small, so beautiful, be so consumed by fear? She finally spoke, and I listened carefully to every word. "I'm terrified of flying," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking the plane will crash and I'll die." My chest tightened. I hated hearing her like this, but I refused to let her panic take over. I turned toward her fully, locking eyes to show her I was present. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone gentle, grounding, "airplanes are the safest way to travel. You really don't have to worry." I could feel her absorbing my words, but I also knew the fear wasn't going to vanish with logic. It was lodged deep like a stubborn stone in her chest. Outside, the engines roared louder, vibrating the cabin as if testing our resolve. I squeezed her hand lightly, willing her to hold on to trust me. We were moments away from leaving the ground, and I could see her fear battling her courage. I took a slow breath and reminded myself she wasn't alone. I had her, we'd face the sky together. The plane sat poised at the edge of the runway, engines humming, vibrating through the floor and into my seat. I glanced at her, sitting rigidly by the window, fingers curled tightly around the armrest. I could see every subtle shift of tension in her body, every flicker of fear in her eyes. She was holding herself together, but just barely. My job was simple: steady her, ground her, and maybe, if I timed it right, make her laugh. I reached over and brushed my hand over hers. She flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. That small motion told me she wanted comfort, even if she was afraid to admit it. "Sweetheart," I said softly, leaning closer, "airplanes are the safest way to travel. Really, you're more likely to be hurt on the ground than up here." Her eyes widened. I could see her brain catching up to what I'd said, racing, calculating. But she still looked tense, still braced for catastrophe. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Trust me, you'll be fine." Then, almost as an afterthought, and with a grin forming despite my attempt at seriousness, I added honestly, "Just yesterday, 150 people died in a restaurant." I caught the sharp intake of breath, the sudden wideness of her eyes, perfect, just the reaction I was hoping for. The tension in her body spiked, fingers tightening on the armrest as she processed the words. I could almost see her mind conjuring every horrifying image possible. "What? Why did they die?" she gasped, voice sharp, trembling with equal parts fear and disbelief. I held back my laugh, fighting the urge to let it slip. "Timing was everything, because a plane fell on the restaurant," I said slowly, letting the absurdity sink in. Her reaction was immediate, a mix of shock, panic, and incredulity. She stared at me, frozen for a moment, and I couldn't help the small grin that crept across my face. The engine's rumble filled the background like a cinematic underscore, punctuating the moment. I reached over and squeezed her knee, softening the moment, trying to balance the joke with comfort. "See," I whispered, voice warm, calm. "You're fine, nothing to worry about, except maybe me." Her glare almost made me laugh again, but inside, I felt that perfect mix of relief and satisfaction. Fear met humor, tension met love, and for a brief moment, the anxiety in the cabin softened just enough to let her breathe. For a split second, I wasn't sure if I'd gone too far. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated, every muscle in her body tense like she was bracing for impact. Not the plane, but my words. The way she gasped, the sudden sharp intake of breath, told me my joke had landed exactly as I'd intended. Maybe a little too well. What? Why did they die? She demanded, voice cracking in that raw, unguarded way that always made my chest ache. She looked genuinely horrified, caught between disbelief and panic, and I couldn't help but marvel at how intensely she felt everything. It was part of why I loved her. She lived fully in every moment. But right now I had to rein her in. Passengers nearby glanced our way. I caught the faintest twitch at the corners of her lips as she realized she might have made a scene. I suppressed my own grin, focusing instead on keeping my hand gently on hers, grounding her. Timing was everything. A joke at 0. 0 feet had to be delivered with care, or the fear could spiral into something real. Her gaze held mine, searching, demanding the truth. I could see the conflict in her expression, the horror of the idea clashing with the tiniest flicker of realization that maybe I was joking. I let my shoulders relax and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "I'm kidding," I said softly, letting my voice carry that calm, steady tone I always used when she panicked. "Nothing happened, no plane, no restaurant, it's just me being ridiculous." She stared at me a moment longer, her chest heaving slightly as the tension slowly drained. The smallest twitch of a smile tugged at her lips. Relief flickered through her, mingling with irritation and disbelief, and I knew I'd hit the sweet spot between terror and humor. The engines rumbled beneath us as the plane edged forward for takeoff. Her fingers relaxed just a little around the armrest, her shoulders dropping imperceptibly. I felt a surge of satisfaction, seeing her slowly reclaiming herself, fear tempered by laughter, or at least by the ridiculousness of the moment. I squeezed her hand again, soft and grounding. "See, nothing to worry about," I murmured, voice low enough that only she could hear. "I've got you, always." And for that brief, perfect second, the tension in the cabin softened. She was still scared, yes, but she was also safe, and I was right there with her. I could see it in her eyes the moment the punchline landed, a mix of disbelief, shock, and a flicker of reluctant amusement. She froze mid-gasp, fingers gripping the armrest like she could anchor herself to the plane. I fought to suppress the grin tugging at my lips, knowing she needed just a moment to process that I was, in fact, joking. Timing was everything. Too soon, and it would terrify her. Too late, and the humor would be lost. The cabin lights flickered briefly overhead, a perfect, almost cinematic punctuation to the absurdity of it all. I leaned back slightly in my seat, letting her soak in the moment, savoring her reaction. She glared at me, lips parted, eyes wide, and I felt a rush of affection mixed with amusement. She was furious, I could tell, but there was that subtle twitch in the corner of her mouth, betraying the tiniest spark of laughter fighting its way through. Passengers across the aisle shifted, curious, but I didn't care. This was our little world inside the cabin, suspended above the earth, and for the first time since boarding, I saw her begin to relax, even if just a fraction. I squeezed her knee lightly, grounding her with a touch that said, "I'm here." "Everything's fine. See," I whispered, voice low, soft, intimate. "Nothing to worry about, except maybe me." I let a small chuckle escape, careful not to startle her. Her glare could have cut metal, but the faintest twitch betrayed her amusement. I had her right where I wanted her, half exasperated, half laughing, and fully present with me. The engines growled beneath us as we inched toward takeoff, vibrations traveling through the cabin. Every other passenger was doing their thing, fastening seatbelts, adjusting overhead bins, but I stayed focused on her. I could feel the tension in her body slowly ebb, replaced by that delicate balance of fear and trust, panic tempered by humor. I reached over, brushing my hand over hers again. "You're safe," I whispered, letting my thumb graze hers in a steadying rhythm. "I've got you, always." For the first time since we boarded, I saw her truly breathe. Not because the plane was safe, though it was, but because I was there, and in that suspended moment between earth and sky, between fear and laughter, I knew we were both ready. Ready to face the flight together, anchored by trust, humor, and the unspoken bond that held us through everything.